All right. Let's try that again. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are super fortunate to have our guests. As you know, we have our Borderlands 3 panel today. We virtually have every discipline represented on today's panel, from production, design, art, programming, and audio as well. So I am super excited and grateful to have our guests' time today in their busy schedule. To not chew up any more time, I'm just going to let them kick it off and introduce themselves, and then we'll have a presentation followed by a Q&A. And so we can start with their Managing Director of Design, Brian Thomas.
Hey, everybody. Thanks again for having us out. Guildhall and Gearbox go way, way back. We've had graduates from Guildhall all the way going back to, I think, cohort 2 or 3. So it's awesome to see the program just keep growing and everybody keep getting better. Thanks again for hosting us today. We wanted to take just a little bit of time to kind of run down some takeaways that we have kind of learned from the process of developing Borderlands 3. We'll try to keep that short because nobody came here for a slide deck. And then we'll get to a Q&A session, and that way we can try to maximize the amount of Q&A that we get out of the day. And we just really want to be here and answer your questions. So with that, I will hand it off to Scott Kester.
Hey guys, Scott Kester. I was art director on Borderlands 3, Battleborn, character designer for Borderlands 1 and 2, or not game design, but visual design of like the Vault Hunters and stuff. So, so I've been here for a while, and working on Borderlands 3, there was a BT had asked a question of like something that stood out to me, and so in this one, I realized that I've been at Gearbox for 12 years now. I've worked with the art team pretty much that entire time. I started as a UI designer, actually, and moved into art. But I've basically been working with the art team for 11 years. And I definitely noticed that, like, as the department, you see this quote, the department gets big enough, the interdepartment conflicts will probably start to occur. Historically, a lot of times you'd hear, art and design are always at odds with each other. Well, this game on Borderlands 3, we started to see divides sometimes happening between the actual art department itself. I mean, the art department was pretty big. It was, like, considerably larger than we've had in the past. So I think that was one thing that kind of would catch me off guard in regards to that, just that these content artists, or the way that these guys were doing this versus this, there was just kind of starting some conflict and things between the team itself. So I just think that's one thing to think about as you're working with a team. It's one thing if you're working with like 5 to 15 people, that's pretty easy to manage. But like, how big was the entire team on Borderlands 3?
Between Frisco and Quebec Studios, about 400 people plus external partners probably tips us to 500.
Yeah, so like it's weird to work with people that you've never met. For instance, it changes things. So, like, between some of the things that happen internally and some of the things that happen in our GSQ studio and some things that we're outsourcing, it's just something to keep in mind as numbers go up. It's harder to keep tabs on people, regardless of how long you've been somewhere or the relationships you have with them. That's good enough for now.
Hi, I'm Kayla Belmore. I was the producer on the content creation pipeline for Borderlands 3, and currently I'm project producer on DLC 4 for Borderlands 3. And one of my biggest takeaways from from Borderlands 3, is that no matter what, for a strike team, they're only as strong and as powerful as the communication within the strike team. So we found that there was a lot of success in cross-departmental strike teams for anything from a level to an interactive object and all sorts of things in between. But if we weren't communicating and being good connective tissues as producers and amongst the team, then the team would not be as strong. So it was really important to double up that communication, and as a production department, help facilitate the communication between teams, and that made us a really stronger studio, and it really helped finish out Project Borderlands 3.
I'm Jesse Lemons. I was the audio manager, which is kind of a hybrid role of like production and also like kind of anything else the audio team needed, like implementation and content creation and stuff. Did a lot of stuff. So my thing was that it was what could I tell myself, my past self, about what BL3 production was going to be like. And it's largely that, like, hey, RAM budgets are real, and it turns out that, like, going from like 300 sounds for guns to like over 5,000, like that's going to eat up your RAM. And just trying to make the game like a bigger and more just larger overall as far as audio is concerned and the presentation there, like we ended up having to like rewrite how weapons audio gets loaded like within the last few months of the project just because we couldn't fit it all. And some say we still can't, but you know, that's a real thing. Also, like, you can't make your audio assets temp enough. Some designer's going to think that sounds good enough, and they're going to say like, yeah, that'll ship. So if you want to make your audio like noticeably temp, just make it as bad as you can. Maybe that's just like a boop. Maybe that's just like a sheep going like burp, but not for a sheep. Okay, so don't do that for a sheep. A temp sheep sound would have to be you making the sound. Okay, that's what I would learn.
Or just robot voices.
Robot voices, yeah. Unless they're robots again. And go back to the sheep, yeah. Sheeps for robots, robots for sheep.
Robot sheep.
Robot sheep.
Okay. All right. I'm Jasper Foreman. I was the lead AI programmer for Borderlands 3. So that mostly involved anything that moves that's not the player. They like to shoot back, so enemies or creatures that would run and jump at you, or NPCs that like to give you quests and stuff. And I wanted to talk about automation. So actually, this kind of touches on what the various things that they've touched on. So if you're a small team, maybe you don't need this as much, but as the team grows really big, you need better ways to help you communicate, and automation can help with that. One common thing for like coders is content integration servers, CIS. You check in something, and it comes back and says, hey, this is broken. Maybe you forgot a file, maybe you forgot a certain config or whatever. It's also good for like content. So with the zillions of audio files that we have, it might be good to notice like, hey, every now and then some button gets clicked that you didn't mean to. And automation can help you recognize that. Like, hey, did you actually mean to do this? Also, maybe you have just limits on your memory. You checked in a giant texture. Did you really mean to do that? Sometimes that's okay. It's a hero piece. But usually you want to like, oh, whoops, I hit that button wrong. So overall, I just think that, yeah, automation, something we did a lot of in Borderlands 3, and I wanted to actually do more of in the future to help make sure that if someone's not there or just some weird button gets pressed, someone notices, and that we don't just find it right before ship, and then all of a sudden that breaks everything else. So.
Cool. And I'm Brian Thomas. Everybody calls me BT. And I'm the managing director of design, so that means I manage, I direct, and I design. So a lot of what I end up doing is just helping the different design disciplines, staffing, training, tooling, anything that we can do to make ourselves go faster or better, and then hold people to standards and coach and mentor and do that sort of work. And for me, one of my big takeaways from the Borderlands 3 project is that, I mean, for us from now on, for AAA games, release date isn't just a finish line you cross. Like, that's just the start of phase 2. Games live forever now. We put out a DLC for Borderlands 2, and that was a 7-year-old game. So, like, we had to keep making builds for 7-year-old games work, and, like, that's an infrastructure challenge, and we have to have staffing ready to work on patching and live support when the rest of the team is just dead tired because they just got over the finish line and they want to get some rest after shipping the game. So it's just a different mentality people need to start getting into, that shipping is just like phase 1, and now game is a live product, whether that's game as a service or just you want to have a good community or patch your game a lot. Like yesterday, I think we put out like the patch notes for our game that went out yesterday were like 7 pages long. So there's still a lot of work that has to keep going on to keep these things alive after the date they ship. And with that, with our quick takeaways about Borderlands 3, we really wanted to be here for you today, so we wanted to put the majority of the time into a big Q&A session. So with that, we want to hear what your questions are.
So as we launch into Q&A, I'm going to steal a mic here. I think I saw one over here first. 1 second. And just some ground rules for Q&A. So as our panelists are responding to your question, If you have if you have another question that you'd like to ask as they're responding, if you could just raise your hand, then we'll come to you to ask your question, if that makes sense. All right, go for it.
So for Kayla, I noticed that you mentioned your strike teams, and I was wondering how your different departments are like subdivided into different teams, and how that plays into your workflow and the like between team to team communication.
Ooh, that's a good one. So we actually evolved that process a lot during Borderlands 3, and we're continuing to evolve it on DLC. Our best practice version of that right now is that we actually have moved the strike teams for levels anyway into a world creation team, and we have dedicated people from concept, level art, level design, missions, content art, and I think that's it for dedicated. And then we pull in resources from other teams. So the interactive objects department, audio, effects, and animation are resources that rotate in and out of it. And with the size of a studio and the team members we have available, that has been really, really useful for us. And those teams talking together and all working on similar content has created a lot more harmony amongst the teams, more ownership, so people feel more comfortable being able to make decisions without leadership having to be a bottleneck, as long as we establish those tentpoles really, really early. Anything that's a super important topic or asset or theme for that level, we definitely need to establish as early as we can, that and all the mission needs. And for other departments, they have sort of their own strike teams. So the IO team comes in and out of ours. So those are interactive objects, big hero pieces that move and animate, and the player has to boop it somehow. And technical term, boop. And they will help our strike teams, but they have their own cross-departmental strike team that has resources that are either dedicated or come in and out of it as well. So we've done the best we can to be flexible with the staff we have, which is really important. Not every department can dedicate an effects person or audio. Our character art team is only 4 people, so in outsourcing, but we just can't do that across, a zillion maps and DLCs. So we have to find the way that works best for us, but as many people as we can dedicate to similar content, we do. And that has been really great for communication and making sure that we continue to follow up and have meetings and set gated milestones for those teams so we know how they're tracking.
Got a question down here.
Hi, I have a question in regards to the audio track. I'm very interested in game sound design myself. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the actual staff that was involved in the sound production and like the different roles that they had and things like that.
Sure. This is great. I'm so glad you asked a question about audio. So we have about a staff of, 5 senior designers. There's one who acts as our audio director, and then about 4 other senior designers. One is sort of dedicated to all of the VO recording that we do in-house. And another one is primarily dedicated to the music production side of things. So he does a little bit of in-house composition. So if you've played BL3, he did the 4th act music for that. He did some sound design here and there for some of the enemies. And then also did manage the 4 contract music composers. Then we have the audio lead who designed most of the weapon system stuff, so how our weapons are more dynamic with how all the different gestalt pieces that come together work, so each one of those gets their own sounds and stuff. And he didn't do every weapon, but he did 80% of them. And he still had final oversight over what that was. And one of our other senior guys did the bulk of the creature sounds, creatures and enemies. We had 2 audio programmers, one who was focused primarily on the music system and also did acoustics and some of the weapons stuff. Both of our audio programmers actually worked with some of the acoustics team at Microsoft. So we use Microsoft Acoustics. If you look for a thing called Project Acoustics, we were one of the first. We're one of the first games to utilize that for occlusion and reverb and stuff like that. And then there was myself, who did a variety of different things, and another guy who is like a mid-level implementation specialist and also became sort of our go-to RAM management dude who was just like telling everybody you're doing it wrong. Like, why are all these things so expensive and that kind of thing. And I think that's roughly everybody.
Pranay?
So my question is something I saw in the presentation which really resonates with like at least half of us right now is that the bigger the team gets, the harder it is to manage the team and manage communication, which I think most of us understand because we were on a team project that was really big and it was hard to do it. So my question is, how do you practice agile? How do you practice a good development cycle and ensure that things are getting communicated effectively in a large team? Like, what are the things you guys do to ensure that?
So the first thing that we did was get rid of being dogmatic about anything related to agile or scrum. I like to describe our process as like agile scrummerfall. Because at different stages in development, particularly on a project as large or the team as large as Borderlands 3, different pieces of it make sense at different times. When you're rapidly iterating and trying to meet early milestones, say on the way to alpha, then some more agile approaches sort of work well. We could not name them sprints anymore because it has a lot of baggage, so we call them cycles. And we would measure month to month, there were a 4-week cycle, how our progress looked. But really, after sometime between alpha and beta, you're not making any new decisions, hopefully, sometimes. You're trying not to, and you're trying to ship the game, so you're shifting into polish mode and bug fixing and finalizing. And at that time, planning out a sprint is really, really useless for the production team. It is okay to be reactive sometime after beta when it's just like get things done. So we're not going to spend our time doing sprint planning and setting up the perfect scrum board because at the end of the day, it's finished the P1s, please ship. So we really have to be agile as a production team, but not necessarily dogmatic about the methodology used. It's more important to think about what the project needs at the stage of development. Are you planning? Are you iterating and working towards goals? Or are you in ship mode and just trying to get the game out the door at the best quality possible?
Lynn?
To add on to that, because I end up having a lot of different design disciplines and cross-departmental teams that work with me, one thing I've found to echo is understand what your team actually wants. Because sometimes people will go, oh, we need more communication, and they'll just, okay, well, we'll just keep scheduling more stand-ups, or we'll just be shotgunning more emails out. And really check base with your team to make sure that those communication methods are what they want and are actually useful. Because if everybody's just filtering that email to their inbox because they're getting it every day and it's just noise, that's not helping. If you're taking development time away to go to a stand-up and everybody's just coming to the stand-up and saying, same thing I was doing yesterday, then that's not helping either. So really, be flexible about it and say, like, what does the team actually want? So for one of my teams, they do a Tuesday morning 15-minute stand-up right before lunch. That's all they need. Another one of my teams, they're all mostly in the same room. So they just have, a couple sync-ups in the afternoon. Usually they call an audible and just say, hey, we need to sync up on, and they just all turn their chairs around and they have a conversation. The two people that aren't in the room walk down. Figure out what your teams need first. Because if you can tailor the solution, you're going to get less pushback and you're going to get more buy-in to the solution you're trying to deploy for them.
So this is pretty applicable to all departments. Was there any sort of particularly memorable, difficult decision that you might have made? And if you can speak to it, what it was, and in particular, being in a lead position, what sort of resources you leaned on to come to a conclusion for that decision, or the people that you consulted to kind of get to the right place that you felt was a good enough option for that decision?
Man, how inside baseball do I want to go on this answer? There's always a certain amount of drama that occurs in a production over 3 years. I'd say for us, there was definitely a big point near the end of the game where the game was too big. We needed to downscope, and we'd already done all the easy downscoping where it's like, oh, well, that's just a side mission. We can cut it. That's just a one-off asset. We can cut it. now it got down to we need to cut characters out of the game, like characters that have been fully modeled and rigged and animated and have gone to voice acting. Like we've sunk cost into this character. We need to cut them from the game to make the game lighter and do what we need to do. And that's just like you try to put your best people in the room. You try to talk it out. You try to make sure you are advocating for both sides of the equation as best as possible. And then you kind of say, that's the creative director's burden and the senior project producer's burden is that they're going to get to be the ones making the call at the end of the day. And then you just sort of have to deal with that political fallout as you have to deal with it. And that's, sometimes teams don't like to deal with that directly. An unpopular decision was made, and sometimes the answer is just like, well, it was just made. It was made by senior people. Don't worry about it. It's been made. But that character artist spent 6 months making that asset, and like that's gonna hurt for that guy. So, one of the things I preach a lot to my leads and to producers is like, be aware of the political fallout for the decision that you're making. It might totally be the right decision, but just be aware of the fallout. Just go have a conversation with the people that are going to be upset by it. Like let them talk it out, let them vent. It's perfectly healthy and natural to do it, and if you give them a good out to do it, then it can be done in a healthy way. And if you don't give them a good out, then it's people grousing in their desks or people, grumbling to themselves or just keeping it inside and not like it's just eating at them for weeks and weeks on end. So that's always my big. If you're going to make an unpopular decision, like own it and go apologize to everybody that you annoyed by it. But just try to push back because they'll get to the point where they realize this was good for the project at the end of the day. It was good that we did that. That saved us time and that let us get out on time. Anybody else?
Scott, you probably remember this one. So towards halfway, a little more in the project, and we were really having some great momentum, it came time to use a specific art set that we had started months and months and months ago, and we hadn't really gotten a chance to use it because it was to build part of the hub map. And we already had a almost done set that matched this niche, and we started building with it. The artist tried to make vignettes with it, the level and content artist did, and the team came to me and said, this isn't going to work, we need a brand new set. And the idea was that we just had to build a couple new pieces to retrofit it and it would be fine and we could finish it within that cycle. So this was something we were tracking on those cycle milestones. And if we didn't have it, that map, which is major, was going to be at risk. And so we looked at it and it was sure enough true that you could not build with this set. And it could be retrofitted if we had to, so to collect the information that I needed to make the decision as to move forward with this retrofitting process or just cut it and build a whole new set this far into production, I got the stakeholders into the room to help me understand the time it would take to build a brand new set versus the time it would take to retrofit and build new pieces for the old set to work, kinda. And the answer was it actually would take longer to get a worse quality product than it would be to start fresh and get people exactly what they needed. But it took me in a room with the stakeholders to be able to answer that question. Because my first reaction was, no, we can't deviate from the plan. I might have cried just a little. And after taking a breath and stepping back and looking at it holistically from all of the department's point of view, not just art department, it came together pretty easily. And I was even able to convince my boss, the project producer, that this was a good idea. So it was a group effort to make sure that the right decision for the project was made.
A tough decision from the audio team's perspective was, coming to the determination that we needed to do any kind of outsourcing, we sort of stray away from that because it's very difficult for us, or it has been in the past, to find an outsourcing team that can give us the quality that we need and deliver the assets correctly. Which I know a lot of smaller studios outsource stuff all the time, but for us we just got burnt in the past, so we were like, let's not do that again. Especially if we ask them to put it in the game, that's just going to be a nightmare. And so that whole decision of we ended up outsourcing pretty much all of our cinematics, so all of the title cards, all of the cinematic stuff. sent out to other people, as well as like a handful of some of the creature audio, and it was a lot of work on my part to like organize all of that stuff and make the asset sheets and send everything out, and then it cost us a lot of time, but not as much time reviewing that stuff and like having feedback and so like time and money and like getting all of that stuff, like the cost benefit analysis of all of that stuff was really a really tough decision. So yeah, that was my thing. Also, to go back to your question, I forgot 3 people, which was our GSQ audio guys, and those guys were amazing. So if they ever watch this on the stream, I didn't forget about you.
If we ever say GSQ, it's Gearbox Studio Quebec, which is our Quebec studio. So.
Cool. So that actually fits in a little bit well with my question. So my question is, you have a large team, but you also have one of your studios in Quebec, which is in a different time zone, in a different country. What's it like having to communicate back and forth with another part of your studio that's super far away? And then what are the major differences between right up the road versus Quebec for what's in the studio?
Yeah, I can get us started. We had several programmers and a couple of AI guys specifically in Quebec that were working on stuff that very much overlapped with what we were doing every single day. And luckily, the time zone difference was actually just one time zone, so that didn't really affect us much. But yeah, it's what, 2,000 miles away-ish? Like it's a couple of, 2 flights. So it's far, and right now it's very cold up there. And the answer is, you just do the best you can. Being in the same room as someone is a lot better than not. So, teleconferencing helps, but there's always audio, technical problems of some sort. Also just timing, trying to we've got to book the room that has the camera with the thing that we can all fit there. The actual instant message, whether it's Slack or Teams or whatever you've got, that actually is probably the thing that we use the most. And every now and then, also we have all of the tools that I talked about earlier, where you have your continuous integration servers. Hey, you broke the build, but you already know that. Or we just have all of our Jira for all of our source control, all that kind of stuff. All of it helps, but the short answer is that it's not easy.
Face-to-face communication, if you can't get it, try to fake it as much as possible. Webcams are lovely. We have a weird little iPad on a robot gimbal that goes down the hallway just to scare us all. But hey, it's a way to talk to them. And just honestly, just doing cultural exchanges, literally just sending people up there and having them come down here. They come down here, we take them to Hutchins, we go get some barbecue. We have better bourbon down here than they have up there, so that's a good trade. And then, it's weird because you'll see somebody and you'll be like, oh man, why is this name? Because it's just this name in a text email or a Jira ticket of man, this person keeps screwing up, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually you meet that person face to face, and you're like, oh, this person's rad, this person's fine. Anything that you can do to actually humanize that little text into an actual human being that has real emotions and a life and a family and a schedule, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, they're doing the best they can. Okay, I can work with this. They're not a horrible human being just because they irritated me at 11 o'clock at night one night. And I think that's the best part, is just getting to meet them, because it's crazy up there. Montreal is a huge development hub. A lot of the people that are working at GSQ, they're starting at GSQ with 10, 15, 20 years industry experience. It's a lot of people that used to work at Ubisoft and Beanox and Activision up there. So, once we kind of got over that initial dating period where we're like, hi, new people that I guess we're all in the same company now, you start to realize oh, you work on a lot of the favorite games that I loved, and you can tell me fun stories about that, and you have all kinds of crazy industry experience that I can tap to get solutions that I haven't thought of. So once you kind of get over that initial kind of honeymoon period, it's been pretty awesome, because they're just really rad people. They just happen to be texting me at 7 o'clock in the morning because of the time change. It's all good.
For us, it was pretty cool getting to meet these guys. And it started out as they had one guy, and they ended up hiring 2 more over the course of the project. But it was super rad to get to know them, because they're just maybe it's the difference between the audio people and some of the other guys, but they were just super chill. or maybe it's because they're Canadian. I don't know. And so like we would. My mistake. Well, I guess it's like we're Texans, not Americans, right? Very specific. They're from Quebec. Yeah. And so like just establishing early on like a good-natured relationship and a relationship that's like, you guys have been, they all three of them I think worked on like numerous Assassin's Creed games and at Ubisoft for like 10 years, and so it's like, hey, what are your secrets? Like, what can you what can you tell us that's going to help us do our job better? We'll tell you like how we do things here and like what makes our lives easier. But yeah, it's just, and like flying them down was the best, because then like getting to meet them face to face absolutely helps, and like learning that like two of them are in like a metal band helps, so like it's just, and also just like keeping constant communication. Like I set up like every other week I would just have a video conference with these guys, and even if we didn't really have much to like update each other about business wise, it was just like, hey, how's it going? Like, good to see you. What's the weather up like there? Oh, it's snowing again. Cool. So it was just a really good experience. And I think we also, I felt I kind of got trained up a little bit on working with people outside of our company back on the pre-sequel when we worked with the 2K Australia guys. Those guys were awesome. Time zone there, yeah, oh yeah. That was a much worse time zone. Like Australia is way worse. Like I would have to stay up here till like 8 at the office to just get there. Like they're all walking in with like coffee, and like, how's it going this morning? And I'm just like, my boss is over there with like a thing of whiskey, and he's just like, just wrapping up the day. And I'm like, all right.
Nick, you have a question?
Yeah. So I was curious. I heard the level art mentioned earlier, and I was kind of curious about that that title in this game development cycle, and kind of how interdisciplinary that title is with different teams, and kind of just want to speak to that a little bit for the game.
So like traditionally, I think this was the first game that we really acknowledged like what level art like meant to us as a team. Historically in the past, it was like there was a level designer and they owned the thing cradle to grave, sort of. But then you realize that different people have different strengths, like versus layout, versus visual, versus gameplay, so on and so forth. So I think the level art in this instance, typically what we try to do and prefer to do is get a base block out that's done by an LD that's thinking about the missions, is thinking about gameplay and all that kind of stuff, and then typically letting the visuals be handled over to more. There are hybrids. There are people that can do all of these things and that are awesome at it. But like as we're seeing as myself as a concept artist, it's like I primarily focus more towards characters. For instance, I can draw a vehicle. You don't really want me to, but like, unless it's a very particular kind, like that I've, and we see that too with a lot of the other artists. So really, for the most part, in regard to level art, we found it really does work best to have people blocking out a space that's more of their discipline. They're thinking about this and that, but then but we try to keep that in tandem with a level artist as far as like reveals, sight lines and stuff, obviously for perf and gameplay and stuff, but reveals from a visual standpoint, and then typically that gets handed off there and they kind of come through and do a pass. The best case scenario is there's a block out, it's tested, it feels okay, we do a level art pass, and then it sits for a minute while the level designer comes back in to modify things, then the level artist comes back through like one more time to do another pass. A lot of times, though, we might have a block out that a concept artist will just come on top of and just paint on top what we think it's supposed to look like. Obviously, when you're creating architecture kits, we kind of have units that we're working with, and we can use a base unit, but we might not know 100% what the actual art set is going to look like, where we understand the height of the walls and so on and so forth. So sometimes a concept artist will do that in the interim of there before we get the right blockouts that go back in there. But that's kind of like... just kind of the division of labor a little bit there. Again, there are people that are amazing at all of it, and they have a leg up there. But we also want to work efficiently and understand that if you have these deadlines and these time frames, that like sometimes it's best to get another set of eyes. I think the one thing that I would also, to go with my little thing there, Working together on a game is like super important, and I think getting the perspective of other people, what they're seeing and what they're not seeing. When I started in the industry, it was very much, this is my level and nobody touches it and I own it and no one does this. And what I've seen time and time again is the more eyes and the more hands that usually, it can be too many, don't get me wrong, too many cooks, but I've seen a lot more strength come out of a map because different perspectives and angles and stuff that have come through there. So it's kind of my side.
Question in the middle here.
So yeah, I was curious as to since you have such a large group, there might be times where like you have an idea, you have to find all the dependencies and you work it out. Later on in the sprint, you might find out, oh, there are more things that we have to do with this particular task. Sometimes that turns into like a drive-by request for like one artist goes to another artist saying, hey, I need this. How does that get resolved? Like any drive-by requests or anything like that? Is that put into like a wish list bucket, or like is that automated, or like how does that work?
I'm the guy that's doing the drive-bys. She's the one that's like,
So it depends. There's a lot of edge cases here because drive-by requests are by nature very edge casey. Sometimes they're small enough where if Scott comes through and says just make it blue, that's not going to be like a huge. Not even once.
it's much more dramatic.
Make it chartreuse. Small changes that don't have a huge ripple effect, we don't really worry about too much, especially it's games, it's iteration, whatever is needed for the project to make it fun. But if it is, let's make this from a push button, something happens for the player to let's make it a manned turret that animates and requires player animation, then that's a conversation that absolutely needs to happen because now you're touching everything from concept art down to effects and audio. Every department is going to have to touch this asset now. So at that point, we would get together as a group, hopefully, as long as the request actually is, flagged by somebody. So we put a lot of trust in our team to put their hand up and say, production, please don't just say no outright, but we want to have a conversation about this asset. And as producers, we have to be trusting enough to say, okay, we'll have the conversation, but you might not get it. And we'll sit down and we'll talk about what the risks are, what it actually needs to make this thing work. And if it's out of scope completely, say, can we make this a little simpler to fit it in scope? And if that question if the answer to that question is absolutely not, it's, well, if you want it that bad, what are you willing to give up instead? And hopefully there's something there. On a rare occasion, we have been told you just have to make more time to get this in, but hopefully the people who are passionate enough for that asset that needs to go in are all willing to put in the extra time and hands to make it, but we try to stay away from anything like that. So it's either simplify or give up something in order to make the new thing happen.
Yeah, I get the drive-bys constantly. So yeah, in addition to a lot of the things that Kayla said, one thing is that strike teams help out a lot. Like that's what strike teams are good for is, hey, there's drive-bys all day long, but hey, they're doing the strike team. That's what they're just iterating on this thing over and over again. So in that case, drive-bys, cool, sure, yeah, spend an hour doing that or a day. Hopefully not a whole week. That's not really a drive-by anymore. But actually for that, the whole week stuff, generally I like to keep some just high-level priority list of like, here's all the stuff that we haven't done yet, and what you're asking for is going to take some time, so here's the list. Where is it? And if they put it anywhere above the bottom, they know that things are going to drop off. I think that helps put things into perspective for most people.
To riff off the cross-departmental stuff works really well. It also helps develop empathy towards other people's pipelines. If you're used to like one of the groups I run is interactive objects, so it's like there's somebody from audio and somebody from effects and somebody from hard surface art, somebody from design, somebody from code in there, and when somebody says like, oh, we're just gonna do this thing, like there's immediately people in the room going like, oh, we have a technical problem with that because it's not gonna work in co-op, or oh, the thing you're requesting, somebody else requested for their mission over here and you just didn't know that they requested it anymore, so we can just reuse that thing that we have. And when you get used to doing that, then those little drop-bys that happen where somebody comes to the desk and it's like, what if that catapult was a cannon? That person that's getting the drive-by can immediately start going like, I know who I need to talk to. I need to go talk to my environment artist. I need to go talk to my effects person. I need to go talk to my audio engineer. They can understand that there's other links in the chain that are going to happen after them, and they need to go vet that drive-by really quick.
Question in the front.
Question for audio. So, what's your expectation for an audio programmer in a productive environment, and how do you interact with the audio engineers?
So you're asking, if I understand this right, what are the expectations from an audio programmer?
Yeah.
Can you be a little more specific?
Like if you're working for the sound system, what would you expect this program will behave? How will he interact with other designers and audio engineers? And if he's actually working with the designers, how will is that behavior becomes like?
So our audio programmers, we actually, like I sat in the room with both of them, along with a couple other people. So the expectation is that the audio programmers, while being like very competent programmers, like understand audio to some degree. So one of our programmers was not initially an audio programmer, and he sort of began learning how our tools and stuff worked, and I think he grew a affinity for making the game sound good. But I don't think that's necessarily a requirement. It helps to want to know audio. Our other audio programmer has a PhD in music composition, so very different world he comes from. But there definitely needs to be ability to communicate like from a conceptual level, like what the designers want as far as like tools and that sort of thing, and like where the desires are for how the audio should be playing back, while at the same time knowing when an idea is bad, like performance-wise or efficiency-wise. All the time our audio programmer would tell me I was doing something stupid. It was all the time. Or I would give a suggestion about, like, what if we did this? Like, what if we played the audio like this? And he would tell me, one of the classic things he would do was he'd be like, okay, yeah, that's an idea. Let's explore that idea. And then he would give me, like, tell me exactly how we would implement that idea, and then say, now that's a bad idea. And so that, I'm not saying you have to do that. I think I found that helpful and irritating. But does that answer your question? Okay. Are you just nodding?
It's been a really long time, but I did do some audio programming way back. The dialogue tool for Borderlands 2, I wrote the version of that. I think Aaron took over later, but yeah, it's very much just a collaborative effort. I mean, you mentioned a lot of the highlights. It's like it's a collaboration where there's designers that are both audio and like creature designers or whatever, all the various designers that want all of their needs met. But it's as an audio programmer, you have to make sure it ships. So as you said, like you might say like, well, you know what? I don't think that's actually going to work. Sometimes you just kind of have to say no, or either a better answer is, what if you just tweaked it a little bit and made it like this, and you get 90% of what you wanted, and as a really great thing, this will ship. That's really the main thing. That's actually, that thing kind of applies to most of the programming positions. Unless you're way down in the bottom level of the engine, most of the time you're dealing with designers and all kinds of other disciplines. You have to work with them and let them know that sometimes things won't work. Sometimes.
On the design side, yeah, for us it's like when we deal with audio, almost every one of my design disciplines deals with audio differently. Level designers care way more about spatialized ambient audio, literally how that air conditioner makes noise and how phys mats make noise when bullets blink them. The creature designers are way more worried about attacks and tells and animation related audio. Our UI designers are way more interested in just like 2D unspatialized audio, and all those systems, the weapons, the missions, the cinematics, everything generates audio in a slightly different way, and all it has to ship and all it has to layer on top of each other because somebody is killing an enemy while a cutscene's going on, while they're opening up the UI, and a bunch of other stuff's happening. So like having that real nuancy level where you kind of understand how all those things stack and how like that's where performance will kill you. Audio programming, effects programming, rendering, they're doing the Lord's work so that the game can actually ship.
We have a question in the front here.
Hi. Kind of going back a little bit about how, like one discipline, they might have like different specializations, or like just strong on one or the other. I'm wondering if that's the case for animators. Like, are they like creature animators? Like, animators actually animate the human characters? I guess, like vehicle animation or anything like that, or do the animators in your team do basically whatever needs to be done?
Probably deal with animation the most. We have some people have definite specialties. Most of our animators are well-rounded animators across the board. We definitely have some that focus more on, biped humanoid stuff versus creature-based stuff, just because there's way different nuances. There's some that are way more into like cinematic and storytelling animations, where you're really controlling camera and you have a lot more fine-tuned control, and you're worried about facial and fingers and just all that fine-tune work. And then almost everything else, it gets really technical. Like we have Josh, one of our oldest employees at the company, does a ton of the weapon animation because it's just all these little nuancing movements, but it's super technical because they have to, this reload animation has to be exactly this many frames for the weapon system to work. Yeah, and there's billions and billions of weapons stacked on top of each other. So like that's that, and like vehicles are like hyper technical in nature. All the animators can get in there, but there's definitely people that grow into certain specialties. I've really rarely found anybody immediately coming into a career with a deep specialty, but most people just sort of by virtue of getting work thrown at them develop affinity towards certain veins of animation.
Question in the front.
I have a question for programming track, and I just want to ask, as a leader programmer, how you control the progress of your team, how you communicate with your teammate, and I think you already answered part of them. I just want to ask, and how you balance your job as a programmer and a leader.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like half of my day is doing normal programming things, and the other half is doing the things you would consider lead doing. A lot of that is meetings, but most of it, I guess, comes down to communication. You're trying to make sure that they are able to do their job as best as they can. And the biggest part of that is making sure that they know what the job is. So the variety of tools we've talked about a little bit, but just documentation is a start. Getting the actual stakeholders in a room with the programmer and saying like, hey, what do you actually want? Let's hash this out. Or if you can't, Skype or whatever, telecommunication kind of stuff. Yeah, so how do you balance that? Yeah, you just kind of like, actually, for me, I have to just kind of cut out, besides the meetings, cut out a little portion of each day to make sure that everything that they've done or need is addressed. Have they finished a task recently? Maybe I should go in there and make sure that they found all the things that they need to do there. Or maybe there's a new task on deck. Make sure that they actually have all the information they need to actually go forward with that. Or if they don't, find the people who want this. You've got to pull information from everywhere to give you to your the people. And then once they've done a thing, you need to push that information back out to everyone else. I think that's most of the job, is just making sure that everyone knows what's going on.
So I'm not sure how often it occurred on a higher level project like Borderlands 3, but I know you mentioned stuff like training. How often and how would the process go for like onboarding a new dev, either to the company or to the project itself? And what did that look like?
I just did that recently, but you did that more recently. Yeah, he's doing it now.
I'm onboarding somebody this week. They graduated Guildhall a couple years ago. Congratulations, new James Lee. But it varies department by department. How I like to handle it, what I'm trying to do now better is when new people come on I try to do the onboarding so that I'm not forcing my leads to do that, because usually the leads are almost always on fire, just trying to get the game out or work towards their deadlines. Whereas like it's literally my job to be a little bit like detached from that process. So like I can take this week and next week to do training with somebody new so that they understand the basics. And you know, so what I did for this like level designer coming in, I went to the lead that they're going to work for. Hey, give me your hit list. Give me what you want this person to know by the time I hand them back to you. So some of it was basic. It's just like the bathrooms are over there. The break room is over here. This is who you get your pay stub from. You know, which is a joke, but it's also real. Like there's, you know, a certain amount of just like you have to learn the company that you're working for and how you request things and get things. And then go through Perforce policy and Jira check-in comment policies and just sort of all the project level policies so that they're getting a clean, consistent worldview, and the next person's getting the same worldview, and the next person's getting the same worldview. And then it comes down to kind of what the lead wants. So in this case, like, okay, we're going to go over the combat systems because this person's going to be doing a lot of combat integration, so they're just living in combat world right now. And then, you know, okay, they're probably going to take this level over, so let's get them strapped in with their level pod, start going to those meetings, start absorbing all that soft information, dragging them to just meet other people that they're going to work with in the near future so that they see names and faces. But man, it is, I can say it is a consistent effort to onboard people properly. Because like half the time it's like we're on fire. It's like, you know, we're trying to get the game out and there's not enough time to actually like sit there and be like, anyways, this is how your key card works so you can get in the building. So it's, as your companies or scale, it's definitely important to like box that out and actually make time for it. Because it does, you know, if that person gets all that information condensed in 2 weeks, that's awesome. If they get all that over 3 months because their lead's doing other stuff, you know, it's not a particularly good way for them to start the company. So, you know, big advice for people that do go to the companies, like spend time to do that work. It's worth it. The dividends pay off.
One thing I just wanted to mention too, in regards to like art styles and stuff. So, working on Borderlands, if you're a prop artist or something and you come in and you're like, I made the prop. It's like, okay, cool. Here, now you have to texture it. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna go. No, you can't do that. Like, you can't. Like, you got to ink it. You know, I don't know how to ink. I'm like, well, you're gonna learn. So it's like, but this is one of these things that like, I'm an inker, so why don't you know how to do that? I think that's a thing that you'll ask yourself a lot while you're working with whoever it is that you're doing, because I'm like, well, I can ink the asset, why can't you? Oh, I'm an illustrator or a artist, and I'm not making this mean, I mean no offense here, but a lot of times people making content art are not illustrators. So when we onboard an artist, typically they, you know, depending on their background, either they did an art test or we brought them in, but a lot of times it's a rude awakening to like, this is not normal. Like, you know, any of the games that I've at least worked on have had a kind of different art style. So when we think about the logistics of things, like Brian said, but also training people up on the art style, because like everything that we do looks a little different. So it's just another challenge on top of that. So to spend that time with the leads and stuff to learn, so.
Question right here.
So, in terms of like leadership and management on teams this large, I was curious how the like work management and responsibilities differ between people like the producers, the directors, and like the team leads.
Man, you know. It really is like, you know, you guys are gonna hear this horse is so dead and beaten so bad, but really it does come with communication, and it becomes with expectations. And you know, I just said something like, why don't you know what's inside my head? You know, well, the creative director doesn't know that because he's over here thinking about this, or she's over here doing this. And I think so much of it is, I've worked at Gearbox. Here's an interesting. I've worked at Gearbox for 12 years. The project I'm on now is the first time I've ever been on a game from the start. So it's a time where you're working with the rest of the leads and the producers to kind of figure out, like, you know, like I'm working on I'm an artist. I'm working on a staffing plan. Like I'm trying to guesstimate the people that are going to be building all the art content and stuff. I mean, I have a guesstimate, but like that's not really, that's something that's more in Kayla's discipline. But I'm coming in with an understanding that our main producer might not really understand the day-to-day of what like a content artist is doing and so forth. So I think a lot of it really is just meeting people in the middle and understanding what do I know and what am I looking for in the project. I mean, what is the creative director looking for? And then I think really it's about having those conversations with your key producers and your key stakeholders, shareholders to understand, is there a unified vision here or is it your vision, and those are two completely like different things. But I think a lot of that really just comes down to being on the same page and getting somebody in the room that's actually gonna, like Kayla can attest, I'm an idiot. I've got some ideas I think are pretty good, but when it comes to getting it done, somebody else has to keep my dumb ass on the rails, So, I don't know. I'll shut up.
Just gonna leave that to echo something that BT said earlier, for producers, I think it's very important to, have a template for how you want to approach your teams, but also be flexible for what your teams need. Working with your lead and having a good relationship with them is so important to finding out what that need is, like talking to them and figuring out where their strengths are and where they might need a little bit more help. Our content lead is an absolute beautiful mind genius when it comes to making his own schedules, knowing his teams, and even to some degree some of the Jira stuff. So the type of support he needed was a lot different than the type of support the character art lead or Scott needed on the concept side. They knew the work in the teams really, really well, but they maybe needed more help on the applying that information and making a schedule and the Jira side of it. So how I approached every single team was they all got the same amount of support, but the support they got was different and tailored to the team in a way that helped them move their pieces forward. I also have experience being a manager, so how I approach being a producer for a development team is different than how I'm a manager. If I'm managing other producers, I want to make sure that I'm looking out for what their career goals are and trying to throw tasks at them that are rounding out their careers, but also in line with some of their goals as well.
One of the things we ended up doing really well in the project was at the end of our sprint cycles, whatever we wanted to call them, that wasn't agile. We would do the review and stream it out to the whole company. So you could go to a room like this and watch it on the screen, but you could just also be at your desk and watch it on a stream, or you could watch the video later. And that really allowed Paul, the creative director, to have clear line of communication to info dump, downward towards the team. Because if you kind of know, okay, I can hear from the creative director what he's thinking about some really big, broad topics of the game, that helps the intermediary leads give their teams marching directions, and the boots on the ground have a lens that they can look at the problem they're trying to solve and be like, well, I heard him say this, so I'm going to go in that direction because I'm pretty sure that's kind of what he wants at the end of the day. But largely we are a corporation structured around a lot of trust, so it's a lot of, we try to delegate down, we try to let the boots on the ground solve problems as best as possible, and just make sure that leads are watching out for the bad stuff and kind of letting the balls and strikes go by as they need to, because you can't micromanage 400 people. The game just never comes out if you try to do that. At some point, you just have to kind of let it go and be like, anyways, the creative director says we're doing this, the art director says we're doing this, your lead told you this. With those three people in mind, make good decisions.
Saab?
So this is an art question. Borderlands being such a story and character-driven experience, could you talk about all of the decisions and aspects that kind of lead up to a character's final visual design?
So that's kind of interesting question, because sometimes that could be the writers thought of this character, they've written some dialogue, we understand the role, so on and so forth. Or there could be a character, like Moxie. I just drew Moxie, not asked to draw Moxie. We were working on DLC 2 for Borderlands. Well, that was 1, jeez. And the one night I was like, this this DLC needs like a figurehead, and I just drew. There's like a ringleader. She'll probably work, and people went, sweet, that's a cool character, and I did like 3 drawings basically, and then that started getting modeled that same week, for instance, right? But you might have somebody that that there's a very clear like I'm like throwing stuff. You might have a character like Ava who was very much dictated in a different way, right? That this is this character that needs the kind of an experience that's like this, that has to come across like this, and there's pros and cons to both of those sides, and we're all creators in the end, and a lot of ideas come from anybody on the team, just because I have spent a lot of my life like looking and studying characters doesn't mean that you don't have a perspective that's like better for that thing from me. So it can come from a writer, it can come from everywhere, but for the most part, we just usually kind of go through, and I don't really feel like any characters really had like so much of a set agenda. We just kind of created things that kind of felt right and put those things together on that. But enemies sometimes are a little more clear, because it's like, okay, this enemy, the creature, creature designer is like, I need this enemy to attack in this manner or have this certain weapon in their hand. There's some, okay, that's cool. But like a lot of times when we're developing a Vault Hunter, one of the player characters or something, there's usually not any description. There's maybe a couple keywords, somebody like, Zane, it's like, it's the operative. It's like, what does that mean? Who's the operative, Like, well, what does the operative do? We don't know. Yeah, operates. Wait. Like a phone? Yeah. It could be. I don't know. He could have sat there and called in airstrikes. I don't know, So you just kind of start drawing. And I know there was a story. It was actually a DLC, and somebody had told me, like, oh, we want to have this Crimson Lance guy that's actually a businessman and has a briefcase. And I was like, that's dumb. And I drew a ninja. and that ninja was Athena. And I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. And it was Hellquest that asked for that, actually. And I drew this, like, sleek cyber ninja with a sword. And people were like, that's cool. I was like, yeah. And then there were ninjas running around, So anyway, it can kind of come from all sorts of angles. So sometimes it's just this feels cool and feels right. Or sometimes Randy says this or someone else says this. So I can't really completely answer that question like accurately, because it can come from all angles. So,
Claire?
I also have an art question, sort of going after what you talked about earlier about art style guy. When you're working on a sequel for a game, I know even though you have a baseline to go after from the previous one, sometimes you still want to do adjustment and changes to improve the visual. Like from the first one to the second one, you guys went with a much vibrant color palette and more highlights in the inking process. So could you talk a little bit about like the adjustment and stuff you did for the third one, maybe?
yeah, so one of the first things was there was a big shift when we started the game. We were still in UE3, and it was, I don't know, how far in? Were we almost a year? 8 months to 9. We were, I don't know, 9 months in development. We switched to UE4, so that meant like PBR was coming in, and there was a huge group that were like, we don't do that. That's not what we do. We have this flat comic book look. But so PBR was like a big thing, and it took actually a while to find the balance with inks and things, because we had it for a while that we were letting that affect the inks and things, and it took a while to find settings that like kind of felt right. But we did PBR was a big shift in the development of it. I knew we had more fidelity and more information, and I'm a noodler and a tweaker, so like we knew we had the main thing that Borderlands really needed was just more resolution to show more detail. And honestly, I probably got too detailed in this game. I think some of the character designs are a little too busy just because we could. I think we learned some stuff from that, but I tried some, you guys might have seen a GDC talk where we had this weird hatch-based shadows and stuff. That was something I was spearheading because I'm obsessed with art, like hand-drawn art and comics, and I described the art look as a moving comic book. So we tried some things, and ultimately we could have shipped with it, but it required it required a lot of work because it was light based. It was object based and not screen space, which don't ever do screen space stuff if you're trying to do like filters across the entire screen because it looks like swimmy garbage. But we were doing it object based. It looked really cool, but it required so much hand holding by the lighting team and things that it just wasn't really gonna work. So I think in the end we just kind of doubled down. Well, we knew that's I'm talking about technical stuff. I think the biggest challenge we really had, and I think this is something you need to ask yourself, like, what are your technical challenges and what are your creative challenges? And to me, this game was more about creative. The technical thing was refinement, a little bit more surface and sheen and fidelity and better outline tech and etc. But the creative thing is really what anybody sees, and that was what are the environments we're going to? What do the characters look like? What is the diversity in the things that we're doing to? I want to make a city. Everybody freaks out because we've never done that. And then I go, I want to make a forest, and they freak out more because we've never done that as a studio like that. So I think those were the things that were, when somebody asked me how do we push the art, I actually just say we tried to be more creative with what we were building and just kind of went wider. We sharpened the technical things, but really it was more about just the diversity of what we were going to do, the enemies we're going to see, and all that. So kind of a long-winded, boring answer. I'm sorry.
Time for maybe one or two, if we're lucky, more questions. So you have one you'd like to ask?
Thank you. So hi, I have a question. It's more mixing the programming side and art side. So as a technical artist, so you mentioned about like having a outline tech for Borderlands is showing some of the edge. And beside that, like what kind of a main role for a technical artist inside Borderlands do? So what they do usually, or are they also handling VFX? Are they also handling like environment, like post-processing, or can you like describe about like what's the main role as a technical artist inside Borderlands?
There's a lot
Thank
of
you.
forms from technical art. If it's like environmental destruction, like destructibility and breakable things, to our terrain tools. Just the amount, like how we're building the terrain system, the materials and the surfacing and stuff on that, to like our enemy customization and colorization. It's really complicated, like setups in regards to changing colors. And then I'm not even talking about guns. Like from a technical standpoint, the way that the gun system is created and the way that tech art like feeds into that design in regards to the rarity types and all these kind of things, like to character customization, to all that. There's a ton of we had some things. Brian McNett, who did a lot of our environment stuff, like we had like if you guys have played the game in Promethea, there's these big channels that like used to have water that the water's drained down. He was creating tools that would basically put water edge lines that would like stay at a certain height and would like kind of run down the entire map from this point all the way down to the ground. So there was a ton of stuff that was like more environment focused, but we talk about the enemies and we talk about the gun system. Those were some of the things. VFX is kind of like their own lane that has they do interface with tech art, and then you get into technical rigging and stuff, and there's kind of these, you're right, there are these lines that blur, but like at the end of the day, I think for me, when I think of most of what that stuff meant, it was more in the customization of characters, environmental shaders, and the gun shaders and setups for that.
They also did the sky domes and any of those systems and a bunch of the tools that we use as well. And a lot of our tech artists, when art is no longer needed or even during, also double up and do optimization work and give the team optimization tools or help optimize and give their advice.
Yeah, I was gonna say tooling is some of the coolest stuff that I've seen them really work on. Like if you look around our environments, we have a lot of like rope lights that have beer cans falling down from them or light bulbs on them, and each of those, they would build little tool widgets. So before a level artist or a level designer would have had to get in there and drag the rope out and then put each individual light bulb where it needs to go and put every light bulb point light where it's supposed to go. And now it's like it's just a tool. You drag it in there, you extrude one edge to where you want it to attach over there, you extrude another, you change a couple variables to change the slack on the rope or the density of the lights. And that thing that maybe took an hour before took 10 seconds. And like those are huge time savings that the tech art team buys us back.
All right. Last comment? All right.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say they also like did all of our water and cloth and stuff, and like as the audio team, we were like, hey, you're making those cool tools. Can we put audio in that? And they were like, go for it. So, yeah, you know, that's another cool thing is like they don't just work with like just visual stuff. Like everybody can work with the tools that they're making.
All right, y'all, I'm afraid I have to close up. This has been awesome. But can we give a big thank you to our guests, please? So if you didn't get a chance to ask your question, I'm sorry, but please feel free to let me know what that is, and I'll be sure to get that question to the team. If you don't mind picking up your trash and throwing it out on your way out, that'd be great. Meanwhile, this closes up our Game Changers. Thank you all so much.